Welcome back to the Dead Ball Podcast. It's that quiet time of night when the games have ended, the highlights have been dissected, and we're left here in the stillness to really think about this game we love. I'm Alec.
And I'm Jamie. And if you're new to our little corner of the basketball universe, this is where we come to escape the noise. No hot takes, no manufactured drama, just two people who genuinely love the sport, sitting in these late hours trying to understand the deeper currents that move through the league.
Exactly. Think of this as that drive home from the arena when you're processing what you just witnessed, having those conversations that only happen when the world slows down. Tonight, we're diving into something that's been fascinating us for years now.
Right, the fantasy basketball mentality. You know what I'm talking about, that thing we all do where we just start adding superstars together like we're building the perfect sandwich. Oh, this guy averages 28, this guy averages 25, put them together and boom, instant championship. But reality has this funny way of being way more complicated than our spreadsheets.
So much more complicated. And specifically, we're talking about why playing with another superstar, another alpha, another guy who's been the guy his entire life is one of the most difficult things to pull off in professional sports. It looks so simple from the outside, but when you really dig into the psychology, the mechanics, the egos involved, it's like trying to merge two different solar systems. Each superstar has their own
Gravitational pull, their own orbit of teammates and
coaching systems that revolve.
revolve around them. And when you try to combine them,
That's a beautiful metaphor. Cosmic basketball chaos. And we've got some incredible examples to explore tonight. Some that worked, some that spectacularly didn't, and some hypothetical pairings that honestly keep me awake at night trying to figure out how they'd even function. So settle in, grab whatever helps you think clearly at this hour, and let's explore the beautiful, messy reality of superstar partnership.
So let's start with the textbook case, the one everyone points to when this conversation comes up. LeBron James and Dwyane Wade in Miami. And I think examining that partnership tells us everything we need to know about how incredibly difficult this process really is.
Absolutely. Because here's what gets lost in all the celebration of those championships. They almost didn't work. That first season, 2010-11, was genuinely awkward to watch. Two of the most graceful, instinctive basketball players who ever lived looking hesitant, uncertain, almost polite with each other on the court.
Polite is exactly right. You could see them thinking instead of just playing. LeBron would drive to the rim, see Wade cutting, and defer when every instinct in his body was telling him to attack. Wade would get the ball in his sweet spot and look for LeBron instead of just taking the shot he'd been taking his whole career.
Right. And that's a thing people don't appreciate about superstars. To get to that level, everything has to be instinctual. You can't be calculating whether to shoot or pass. You just know. Your body knows. But suddenly, you're sharing the floor with another guy whose instincts are just as strong as yours. And now there's this constant negotiation happening in real time. Exactly. And let's remember the context here. This wasn't LeBron joining some random team. This was Dwyane Wade's city, Wade's franchise. He'd already delivered a championship there in '06 as the finals MVP. So you've got one superstar entering another superstar's established kingdom, and that creates this incredibly complex psychological dynamic. And that's where the real difficulty comes in. It's not just about basketball skills or even basketball IQ. It's about identity, about who you are as a person and a player. Wade had to look in the mirror and make what might be the hardest decision a superstar can make.
Which was accepting that he had to become the number two.
Not just in press conferences or public statements, but in his bones, in the way he approached every single possession. And that's a profound psychological shift for someone who's been the alpha their entire life. Think about it. From the time Wade was probably 12 years old, he was the best player on his team. The offense ran through him. Coaches deferred to him.
Right. And it took that devastating loss to Dallas in the 2011 finals to really catalyze that change. That failure was absolutely necessary, wasn't it? Like they had to hit rock bottom to realize that just being individually great wasn't going to be enough.
Absolutely. All season long, they'd been trying to make it work through sheer talent and good intentions. But talent isn't chemistry. After that loss, something fundamental shifted. Wade didn't just step back, he actively pushed LeBron forward. He became LeBron's biggest advocate on and off the court. That's when they became a true
Partnership instead of two guys taking turns being great. And the basketball that followed, those next 2 seasons were just poetry in motion. But it took all of that struggle, all of that ego management to get there.
Which brings us to the modern era, where I think this problem has gotten exponentially more complex. The game has become so much more heliocentric than it was even 10 years ago. Usage rates are through the roof. These guys control every possession in ways that previous generations never did.
Which makes the sharing even more difficult. And that brings us to the hypothetical that I literally cannot get out of my head. Luka Dončić and LeBron James. On paper, it's almost too perfect to imagine. Two of the highest basketball IQs ever, both incredible passers, both able to see the game 3 steps ahead of everyone else.
And in practice, it might be a complete disaster because both of their genius is predicated on having the basketball in their hands. They're not catch-and-shoot players. They're not guys who thrive off quick decisions. They need to probe, to dribble, to feel out the defense with the rhythm of their possession. Exactly. Luka's entire approach is this methodical,
Almost deliberate dissection of what the defense is giving him. He needs time and space to work that magic. LeBron, for 20-plus years, has been the primary initiator on every team he's played for. So the fundamental question becomes, who gets the ball?
that's the entire problem right there. And unlike the Wade situation, where there was somewhat natural hierarchy based on age and career accomplishments, this would be two guys at the absolute peak of their powers. Neither one has shown any inclination to be a secondary option. Let's game this out. Say Luka has the ball. He's running the offense, doing his thing, taking his time to break down the defense. What is LeBron James doing during all of this? Standing in the corner like some role player? Can you even picture that? One of the greatest basketball minds ever reduced to a spot-up shooter? It feels like such a waste. You're taking your queen and using it like a pawn. It completely neutralizes a huge part of his value.
Right, but flip it the other way. LeBron brings it up, he's directing traffic, orchestrating the offense. Now what is Luka doing? And this is where it gets really problematic, because Luka's off-ball movement has never been a strength. He's not a natural cutter like Steph Curry. He doesn't run frantically off screens.
And that's not a criticism of Luka. He's never had to develop that skill because he's always been the primary ball handler. But now you'd be asking him to learn an entirely new way of playing basketball at the highest level. You'd be asking both players to fundamentally change the way they've played their entire careers.
The very habits that made them superstars in the first place. It's a massive ask. And think about the rhythm aspect too. Both players need to feel the ball to get into their flow, to understand what the defense is doing. If you're only touching it on every other possession, you lose that connection to the game.
It's subtle, but rhythm is everything for players at that level. It's the difference between conducting an orchestra and waiting for your solo. And both of these guys are natural conductors, always have been.
You know, this reminds me of something I was thinking about. Remember when Kobe and Shaq were together? Obviously that worked out pretty well, but even there, the roles were clearly defined from the start. Shaq was the dominant force in the paint, Kobe was the perimeter creator. Their skill sets were complementary rather than overlapping.
Right. But even then, they had massive ego clashes over who was the real alpha. And if two players with completely different skill sets struggled with sharing the spotlight, imagine two guys who essentially do the same thing at an elite level.
It becomes this constant, subconscious negotiation on every single possession. And in the playoffs, when the game slows down and every possession is crucial, you can't be having negotiations. You need instant decisions.
Pure instinct. Exactly. That split-second hesitation, that moment where you're thinking instead of reacting, that's the difference between a championship and going home early. Which is why I have so much respect for what Wade did in Miami. He made that sacrifice look easy, but it couldn't have been.
No, definitely not. And looking at other successful partnerships over the years, there's almost always been that clear hierarchy. Magic and Kareem. Magic was the floor general, but Kareem was the go-to scorer in crunch time. Bird and McHale. Bird was obviously the alpha, but McHale carved out his specific role in the post. Even Jordan and Pippen. Pippen was incredible, arguably one of the best second options ever, but he understood his role as the perfect complement to Jordan, not another Jordan. The partnerships that struggle are usually the ones where you have two guys trying to occupy the same space, literally and figuratively.
That's such an insightful point, and it makes you appreciate how rare it is to find two legitimate superstars who are willing and able to make those adjustments. It's not just about basketball skill, it's about emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and ego management.
Absolutely. And I think that's why we see so many of these super teams fail, or at least underperform expectations. The talent is obviously there, but the chemistry, the willingness to sacrifice, that's much harder to manufacture. Think about the Lakers a few years ago with Russell Westbrook.
Oh, that's a perfect example. On paper, you've got LeBron, Anthony Davis, and a former MVP. Should be unstoppable, right? But in reality, Westbrook's need to have the ball in his hands clashed directly with LeBron's approach to the game.
Yeah, Westbrook's greatness had always been tied to his relentless aggression, his need to attack constantly. But playing with LeBron required patience, off-ball movement, making the extra pass. You were asking him to suppress the very qualities that made him great in the first place.
Exactly, and that's the paradox. Sometimes adding more talent can actually make you worse if the pieces don't fit. It's like having two starting quarterbacks on the same football team. They're both great at what they do, but you can only have one directing the offense at a time.
That's a perfect analogy. And it makes you wonder about some of the other hypothetical pairings people throw around. Like I've heard people suggest Jason Tatum and Luka Dončić, both incredible players, both incredibly ball dominant in their own ways.
Right. Tatum has shown he can play off the ball to some degree, but his most effective moments come when he's creating his own shot, when he's in rhythm. Put him next to another heliocentric star, and you're asking him to change the fundamental nature of his game. It's like that old saying, you can't have two captains on the same ship. But in the modern NBA, with the way the game has evolved, every superstar is used to being the captain. They've had to be to reach that level. And here's what's really interesting to me. The players who seem to adapt best to playing with other superstars are often guys who had to share from early in their careers. Look at Steph Curry and Kevin Durant in Golden State. Steph had already learned to play with Klay Thompson, with Draymond Green orchestrating things. That's a brilliant observation. Steph never had to completely reshape his game because he'd always been part of a system, rather than being the system himself. So when Durant arrived, it was more about finding new ways to utilize his skills within that existing framework. Exactly. And Durant, for all his incredible scoring ability, has shown throughout his career that he can adapt to different offensive systems. He's not as ball dependent as someone like Luka or even LeBron. He can get his shots within the flow of an offense. Right. KD can be lethal without creating that flow himself, whereas other superstars need to generate that rhythm from the ground up. That's a huge distinction when you're trying to fit multiple stars together. You know what else fascinates me about this topic? The age factor. We've been talking mostly about players in their prime, but what about when you have superstars at different stages of their careers? Like that hypothetical LeBron-Luka pairing. LeBron at 39, 40 years old, may be more willing to take a back seat than he would have been at 28. Maybe, but even then, you're talking about one of the most competitive humans on the planet. I'm not sure LeBron James ever truly wants to be the second option, regardless of age. His basketball identity is so deeply tied to being the primary decision maker. That's fair, and look at how he's currently handling playing with Anthony Davis. Even there, where the roles seem more naturally defined, AD as the dominant big man, LeBron as the playmaker, you still see LeBron taking over in crunch time, becoming that primary scoring option when it matters most. Right. And that pairing works because their skill sets are genuinely complementary. AD is comfortable operating without the ball, working in the post, being a lob threat. LeBron handles the creation and facilitating. The roles make sense spatially and tactically, which brings us back to the fundamental issue. It's not just about having two great players. It's about having two great players whose games actually complement each other, who can coexist without stepping on each other's strengths. And when you're talking about two perimeter superstars who both need the ball, that becomes incredibly difficult. You know, I keep coming back to that Miami example because I think it's still the gold standard for how to make this work. But even then, it required such a specific set of circumstances. Wade's maturity, LeBron's willingness to grow, that crushing defeat that forced them to reevaluate everything. And let's not forget, they had Pat Riley orchestrating the whole thing. A coach with the credibility and the ruthlessness to hold everyone accountable, to force those difficult conversations. That matters enormously too.
Riley had been through this before with Magic and Kareem, with multiple championships. He understood the psychology of managing superstars. Not every coach has that resume or that credibility. Imagine being a first-time head coach trying to tell LeBron James and Luka Dončić how to share the basketball.
Yeah, good luck with that conversation. And I think that's another underrated aspect of all this, the coaching and organizational support that these partnerships need to succeed. It's not just about the players figuring it out on their own.
No, definitely not. You need a structure, a system that can accommodate multiple superstars without diluting what makes each of them special. And then there's the timeline pressure. In today's NBA, if a super team doesn't work immediately, the pressure to blow it up is enormous. That's such a good point. But these partnerships often need time to develop, to find the rhythm. Miami had 4 years to figure it out. In the modern NBA, with player movement and media scrutiny, teams don't have that luxury of time. Right, if LeBron and Luka played together and struggled out of the gate, the narrative would be everywhere immediately. Every talking head would have an opinion about why it wasn't working.
And that external pressure makes the internal process even harder. When you're trying to figure out complex chemistry issues, the last thing you need is constant speculation about whether the experiment is failing. It creates this vicious cycle where the pressure to succeed immediately makes success less likely. Because rushing the process, forcing the chemistry, that usually makes things worse, not better. You can't manufacture the kind of trust and understanding that these partnerships require. There's also an interesting international perspective to consider here. Luka, for example, grew up in a basketball culture where individual brilliance was always supposed to serve the team concept first. But the NBA is different. It's more individualistic, more star-driven from the ground up. That's fascinating. So, theoretically, Luka might actually be more adaptable to playing with another superstar than an American player who came up through the AAU system, where you're often the focal point from a young age. Potentially, yeah. Although by now, after several years as the unquestioned number one option in Dallas, he might have absorbed some of that American individualistic approach. It's an interesting cultural wrinkle to consider, though. And it makes you think about other international superstars.
Giannis grew up poor in Greece, had to share everything with his brothers from day one. That background might make him more naturally inclined toward collaboration than someone who's been treated like a basketball god since middle school.
That's a really thoughtful way to look at it. Your basketball background, your cultural background, your personal history, all of that shapes how you approach
Sharing the spotlight with another elite player. It's not just about basketball skills or even basketball IQ. Right, it's about your entire worldview, your relationship with ego, your definition of success. Those are deep psychological factors that you can't just coach around or scheme your way out of. Which brings us back to why the Miami situation
was so remarkable. You had two American superstars, both products of the same basketball culture, but they found a way to transcend that and make it work. That speaks to their individual character as much as their basketball ability.
And maybe that's the real lesson here. It's not about finding a formula or a system that works every time. It's about finding the right people, not just the right players, but the right human beings who can navigate that complexity together.
That's beautifully put. It's about emotional intelligence, maturity, the ability to see beyond your own immediate needs and wants. And those qualities are much rarer than basketball talent, even at the highest level.
Think about how many incredibly talented teams have failed over the years, not because they lack skill, but because they couldn't figure out how to coexist. The talent was there, but the human element wasn't.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes basketball so endlessly fascinating as a sport. On the surface, it seems like it should be simple: get the best players, put them together, win games. But the reality is infinitely more complex and human and unpredictable.
It's like a real-time psychology experiment happening at the highest level of competition. How do these incredibly driven, successful individuals learn to subordinate their own needs for the greater good? And some of them simply can't.
And there's no shame in that. Some players are just wired to be the alpha, period. It's often what made them great in the first place. But it does make them incompatible with certain partnerships, and that's okay too.
Right. Not every great player needs to be part of a super team. Sometimes the most authentic path is just being who you are, leading your own team, writing your own story. There's something beautiful about that too.
Absolutely. And when partnerships do work, when you see two superstars truly complement each other and sacrifice for the greater good, it becomes one of the most compelling storylines in sports. But it's also incredibly rare, which is what makes it so special when it happens.
The rarity is part of what keeps us fascinated by these hypothetical pairings. We're always looking for that next magical combination, that next partnership that could redefine what's possible in basketball.
The eternal optimism of the basketball fan. What if these two incredible players could just figure out how to play together? It's a beautiful dream, even when reality makes it much more complicated than we'd like to admit.
That's exactly right. And that's what keeps bringing us back to these late-night conversations. The eternal hope that maybe, just maybe, the next superstar pairing will crack the code and show us something we've never seen before.
This has been such a rich conversation, Jamie. I feel like we could go on for hours about this topic, diving into every possible pairing and scenario. But as we start to wind down, what's your overall takeaway? If someone asked you to sum up why playing with another superstar is harder than it looks, what would you tell them?
I think I tell them that basketball greatness isn't just additive. You can't just put two 30-point scorers together and expect 60 points. The game doesn't work that way because humans don't work that way. Every superstar has spent their entire life being the system. Their greatness is built around that assumption. So when you ask them to share that space, you're asking them to fundamentally change who they are as players and people. Sometimes that's possible, but it requires an incredible amount of maturity, self-awareness, and sacrifice. And those qualities are rarer than pure talent.
I love that. And for me,
I think the key insight is that these partnerships are as much about psychology as they are about basketball. The X's and O's matter, but the human element, the egos, the histories, the personal relationships, the willingness to evolve, that's often what determines success or failure.
Right. When it works, when you see two superstars truly complement each other and sacrifice for the greater good, it's basketball at its absolute best. It's one of the most compelling storylines in all of sports. But it's also incredibly rare, which is what makes it so special when it happens.
Beautifully said. And I think that rarity is part of what keeps us fascinated by these hypothetical pairings. We're always searching for that next magical combination, that next partnership that could redefine what's possible and show us new dimensions of the game.
the eternal optimism of basketball fans everywhere. What if these two incredible players could just figure out how to make it work? It's a beautiful dream, even when reality reminds us how complex and difficult the actual process is.
And that complexity is what keeps bringing us back to these conversations. Until someone does crack that code and shows us something we've never seen before, we'll keep analyzing, keep wondering, and keep appreciating those rare moments when superstar partnerships actually reach their potential.
Because when it does work, when you see two generational talents truly unlock each other's potential, it really is as good as basketball gets.
And that's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us on another late-night journey through the deeper complexities of this game we love. I'm Alec.
And I'm Jamie. Whether you're driving home from work, lying in bed thinking about basketball, or just looking for some thoughtful conversation about the sport, we genuinely appreciate you spending this time with us in the quiet hours.
Keep those minds curious, keep watching the game with those deeper questions in mind, and we'll see you back here next time on the Dead Ball Podcast.
Good night, everyone.